if you wanted to rip someone off, I'm sure you could find better ways of doing it. And we actually know that people aren't by and large doing it to rip people off, because the dilution process of creating a homeopathic remedy, which is very involved and very time consuming, they appear to be doing it by the book. So they're spending all their time taking a drop of their initial substance and putting it into 99 drops of water, and then shaking and banging that around, and then taking a drop of that remedy into another 99 drops of water and shaking and banging that around, and doing it again and again and again and again till you get your water at the end with nothing at all in it. We know they're doing that legitimately, so they're not doing it to rip people off. But I imagine as a practicing homeopath, you probably do okay for yourself. I mean, you might be able to charge 60 quid for a half hour or 60 quid for an hour, which if you get enough patients through in the day, then you can fill your time and do fairly tidily for yourself. But it's not like there is a GlaxoSmithKline style sized homeopathy manufacturer there making trillions of pounds. I think there are some that make tens of millions and possibly even hundreds of millions, but it's not that large, not so huge industry. But certainly it's still enough to be concerning. I mean, especially when you're selling things that don't work, that you're making health claims for, that ultimately people who are very sick could take those claims seriously.
Given all of this, we've sort of skirted around the fact a little bit. Homeopathy available on the NHS. Now, can I ask you, where is it available on the NHS, and is it directly available? Can it be prescribed directly by a doctor? Or is it, he refers you to someone else and then that person refers you to another, and then the bill comes back to the NHS in a circular way? How does it actually work with homeopathy on the NHS?
Well, this is quite an interesting question, an interesting story, really, because actually one of the things that surprised me most when I first started working for the Good Thinking Society about two and a bit years ago, and really look into this question, was that nobody really knew where in the NHS homeopathy was. Everybody said homeopathy was available on the NHS, but nobody knew where and to what extent, because there was no governmental body or no part of the overall NHS whose job it was to figure out where to green light homeopathy for the entire country. It's just not how it works. So the only way to get to the answer of that question would be to ask every one of the health boards individually around the country, and then collate those figures. So I actually spent about 6 months of my life sending freedom of information requests to literally 220 or something like that health boards to find out about their homeopathy funding. And what we found is quite an interesting pattern. There's the overwhelming majority of England has no homeopathy. More than 80% or more of the health bodies do not fund homeopathy and don't spend any money on it. In England, where the money was being spent, there was a little cluster up in the Newcastle region, which is now ended, thankfully. There was a cluster around the Liverpool, Merseyside region, which is weird because I've lived in the northeast originally, and I'm now living in Liverpool. So I kind of felt like homeopathy was following me. Like there's these great big empty spaces in the country where there's no homeopathy, but then wherever I live, there's been some homeopathy.
Are you moving to Glasgow next?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But no, so you had some homeopathy in like 4 or 5 health bodies around Liverpool, and some around Bristol, quite a lot in London, and then up in Glasgow, and probably there was a fair coverage in Scotland, really, but it was mainly what we found is that homeopathy is really anchored around where there is or was a homeopathic hospital. So there's a homeopathic hospital in Liverpool, Bristol, London, Tunbridge Wells, and Glasgow. That's where the 5 homeopathic hospitals were. I think the Tunbridge Wells one shut down in something like 2009, something like that. So what we found is wherever there was a hospital, that's where the anchor for spending actually was. And that's really where most of the spending goes. So if you're in one of those CCGs, they're called, these the public health bodies, if you're there and for certain types of treatments, you can go to your GP, and if you've got, I think fertility issues is one of them, or a weight loss program's another. You can say, I've got weight loss issues, I've been through conventional treatment, it hasn't done very much for me, I'd like to be referred to the homeopathic hospital. And in those CCGs, you'd get referred there and you'd be given homeopathy. And this is how it was maybe a couple of years ago. Now, thankfully, over the last couple of years, things have started to change. I think there used to be 31 CCGs of 211 in England that funded homeopathy, and that number's coming right down. It's in the low 20s now, and it's heading down even further, partly because of pressure and campaigning from skeptics, really, and the amount of attention that's been brought to these issues, not least by us as a Good Thinking Society, but also by the skeptical community in general. And the more visibility that we're able to put on this issue, the harder it is to continue justifying funding, and we see these fundings starting to dwindle away. So if you're in one of those bodies near a hospital, or what was a hospital. So Liverpool doesn't have a homeopathic hospital anymore. It has a private company which supplies a small amount of homeopathy, and that is now currently under threat. In October of last year, the Bristol Homeopathic Hospital closed down and has been replaced by a private company, the Portland Centre for Integrative Medicine, and that's now getting a small amount of funding, but that's under threat too. So really, once the hospital goes, the support for homeopathy dries up. And it's because these hospitals are just a legacy, really. They're a hangover from when homeopathy was a lot more respected before it was shown and comprehensively accepted to be complete bunkum. I believe it was originally on the NHS simply because of the committee who first put the NHS together after the Second World War. There was a homeopath involved in that committee, and they said, yeah, obviously we're going to have homeopathy on the NHS. And people didn't question it at the time. So if you're one of those places, you can get homeopathy. You get a referral to the homeopathic hospital or the homeopathic clinics to be given homeopathy there. If you're not in one of those places, there is a direct prescription route by GPs, but typically they have to kind of justify why they're doing that. So there's things like individual funding requests where you have to go to a body and say, I think this patient should get homeopathy for these reasons here. And if that body signs it off, then you can write a prescription for homeopathy. But even then, we actually found that the amount of money that's being spent on that direct prescription from a GP route is about £40,000 a year for the entire of the UK, I believe it is, which is not very much at all. That's a very small amount. And it's actually been dropping hugely. I mean, there's data that's put together by the Nightingale collaboration that looks at the country's prescribing record every year to see how much has been spent on homeopathy. And they found that about 20 years ago, there was something like £250,000 or even more, maybe it's £500,000 being spent on homeopathic remedies through direct prescription. And that's now down to £40,000 and falling. So it's very clear which direction this is going in. But still, that doesn't mean that that's a good thing, that there's still £40,000 being spent. And that's why we, as the Good Thinking Society, actually threatened to bring a legal case against the government because we looked at the rules for what can and can't be prescribed. And there's this big list of things that there's a list there of things that are not allowed to be prescribed by a GP. Essentially, what happens is a chemist is not allowed to get the money back for this product if it's on this list, which means the chemist isn't going to take a prescription for it because they're just going to be giving it away and not making any money on it. They're giving it away for now. So effectively, it ends GP prescriptions. And this thing's called the blacklist, and it's got thousands of different products and things on there, and things that legitimately work but might be too expensive, for example. And so we looked at the criteria for this blacklist, and by every criteria we could see, homeopathy should be on the blacklist and should not be prescribed by a GP by all the laws that actually govern this list. And so we made an argument to the Department of Health saying that according to the laws that under which this list is maintained, you should have to put homeopathy on there, and you've got no reason not to. And that's actually something that just after, in the next couple of weeks to months, that consultation is going to be happening. And it looks like there's a very good shot of getting homeopathy put on that blacklist, of ending that £40,000 worth of direct funding, which is, as I say, quite a small amount. But the symbol of it, the symbolic value of being able to say the NHS has said GPs cannot prescribe homeopathy because it doesn't work and it's too expensive, and et cetera, et cetera. That symbolic value is worth much more than that £40,000. It's a very clear marker, a line in the sand drawn as to say this is the NHS taking a stand for evidence-based medicine, for science-based medicine, and away from remedies that are disproven. And that £40,000 can go and be spent on something that actually works. You know, the £4 million a year that we found out that the country is currently spending on homeopathy in terms of taxpayer money. How much can that £4 million? How much good can that £4 million do in terms of nurses or junior doctor pay or public health measures to increase vaccination rates? There's all sorts of things that money could be spent on that could have a really positive effect for the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And what can people do if they want to get involved to help support these initiatives?
Well, there's lots of ways. I mean, first of all, spreading information about it is really invaluable. There are still people who have no idea that homeopathy is funded on the NHS, people who would care about it if they knew about it. So finding information and just spreading that and telling their friends about it and posting it on Facebook and posting it on Twitter, those kind of things are really valuable. Another thing that's been really valuable for us is, I mean, we're a charity, the Good Thinking Society, and the only reason that we were able to bring our legal case on blacklisting to the Department of Health. And we also had another really big case in the start of last year where Liverpool CCG made a decision to continue funding homeopathy. And we looked at that decision and we found the reasoning behind it and the process of that decision making was very flawed in our opinion. And we were able to actually bring a legal case against the Liverpool Health Board, and they backed down and went back to consultation and are now looking to hopefully get rid of homeopathy. The only reasons, or the only thing that allowed us to do that, was that we had the funding from supporters to enable us to engage our lawyers on this. And so that's a very valuable thing as a charity. If people do believe in the work that we're doing, if they're able to throw a fiver in now and then and to say, I want to stop homeopathy being funded on the NHS because I want NHS funds to be spent on stuff that works, all that money that helps us kind of fight these battles or put together these cases or do this campaigning work makes a huge, huge difference to us and our ability to do things. So, yeah, funding us is definitely something that I would suggest. And I guess the other thing is, if you're in one of the areas where homeopathy is funded, keeping an eye on when there are these consultations, and we'll be publishing information on each of these consultations as they're happening. Because I went to a consultation I mentioned the one in Liverpool where there was 3 people there who were skeptical about homeopathy and 27 people who were pro-homeopathy. And that was a very hard room to be in because so many people wanted to shout us down and have their say, and the meeting was there for people to have their say, but they were quite reluctant to let us have our say. But then a couple of weeks ago, I went to a meeting in the Wirral over exactly the same thing for Wirral CCG, but of the 40 people there were 12 people there who were sceptical about homeopathy, and the meeting was much, much more balanced, more civilized. Everybody got to share their views. It was very hard for anybody to railroad it or push their own agenda, and that was because we had more people there who were wanting to put forward the scientific point of view. So if you are able to see these kind of things coming up or watch for when we're alerting people about these things coming up and being there in the room and helping share these kind of points of view, then it really does give the health boards a much better mandate for making a reasonable decision, because they aren't just hearing from 100% of people who are pro-homeopathy. They're getting some support from the other side of things and some views from the other side of things that show that this is maybe a bit more nuanced than everybody thinks homeopathy is wonderful. And I'm sure in Glasgow there'll be similar kind of consultations happening, and that's something we'll be keeping an eye out for and publicising. So if people can get along to those or get involved in online consultations and share their views on these kind of things, that's hugely, hugely beneficial.
And just as a last kind of point on the more alternative medicine sort of scene in general, because, I'd like to, in future, hopefully I'd like to get you back on to talk about the anti-vaccination thing, but that's a whole other episode there. But one of the things, just in general, alternative medicine, is that I've heard often that homeopathic doctors and other kinds of practitioners like this, well, practitioners may be aggrandizing them a little bit, but the patients feel better apart from just the placebo effect of the sugar pill. It's simply the fact that the doctors spend so much time with them. When you go to your normal GP, it's right, you're in for 5 minutes, okay, you've got that, right away to the chemist, right, on you go. And it's in and out, and the doctor's under pressure. But when you go to these places, they spend a lot of time on you, a lot of attention to detail, and that obviously has a placebo effect as well. I mean, do you think that's a major part of it as well? Just the fact that everyone likes getting attention.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think it's a tricky thing, really, in that the benefits of being with a homeopath is that you get that hour. You spend an hour or even 2 hours with somebody who's there to listen to you and ask questions about all sorts of different parts of your life, because in the homeopathic kind of tradition or the homeopathic belief system, everything matters. So you need to ask about all this stuff. But as the patient for that, then what you're getting is somebody who's asking you about absolutely everything. You think, well, they're being so thorough. This must be great for me. So you do get that kind of side of things. And I've spoken to patients who have been on homeopathic services on the NHS, people who are quite ill or feel, they've got chronic conditions, things like that, and very upset about the idea that homeopathy wouldn't be funded. And what they say is they've got a very interesting story, which is that I've got this particular complaint and I went to my doctor and he gave me this drug, and then that didn't work, so I went back and he gave me this drug, and that didn't work, so I went back and he gave me this drug, and I felt like I was being used like a guinea pig and bounced from treatment to treatment. And I can understand that, absolutely, because from the doctor's point of view, you might see 100 people with this one particular condition, and for 50 of them, this first drug is going to sort them right out, and they go out that door and they don't come back because they're fine. But the 50 people are going to come back, but this next drug is going to treat 25 of those. But 25 are going to come back. And of those 25, this next drug might treat 20 of them, but there's those 5 cases that don't respond to the first, second, or third drug. Those 5 people are going to feel like they've been, experimented on, or they might come out feeling like they've been experimented on. When actually, they're just the unfortunate people in the statistics. Is that the doctor has to kind of go through the pathway of what's most likely to help the most people first. But the interesting thing is that same patient was saying, so I didn't want to go through any more conventional stuff, and I went to a homeopath, and they were great because they listened to me, they talked to me, they tried me on this